So good evening, everyone. Welcome to you all. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing. I'm the Corporate Events Manager for LSBU. I'm excited to welcome you here this evening to talk about our exciting new partnership with the Health Foundry as we explore innovating in midwifery. Before I hand over to Sarah, I'm going to take you through some virtual housekeeping, starting with a short statement on respect and dignity. Everyone speaking at or attending an LSBU event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity, and courtesy. LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion, and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback, and comments, and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating, and bringing communities together. LSBU does not tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment, or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour, including behaviour that potentially impacts or contradicts LSBU's reputation and values, will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any example of this behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. We want our events to be an enjoyable, safe, and warming experience for all. Thank you for adhering to these guidelines. And I do like to think that our events are a warm place, and it's great to see the chat box really reflecting that already. Please continue to use the chat box to share your introductions, let us know who you are, what you do, where you're joining us from, and use it to share your thoughts and comments as well. You'll see along from that there's the Q&A function, and I'd like to ask you to distinguish between the Q&A function and the chat box. Please pop all of your questions for our panelists in the Q&A box, letting us know who your question's for, and we'll get round to them towards the end when we've got time for Q&A. Just to let you know, you can also upvote on the questions you most want answered by clicking the little thumbs up symbol, and that boosts the questions to the top of the list. You'll see that I've also enabled closed captioning, which are the subtitles that you see appearing on your screen right now. You can hide those by clicking the little up arrow next to CC Live Transcript at the bottom of the screen, but we do enable those in the interest of accessibility and inclusivity. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. We'd love to see your thoughts in the chat box and on Twitter. And I'm going to share our Twitter handles and our hashtag in the chat box now for you to share those. Finally, towards the end of the event at 7 o'clock, we are going over to Zoom Pro, where you'll be able to turn your cameras and microphones on and engage in kind of open conversation with some of our speakers today and ask any questions that we don't get around to. And if you should have already received the link in the joining email, but I'll pop that in the chat box towards the end. That's all from me. I'm in the background. If you have any questions at all during the event, I'd now like to hand over to Sarah.
Hello, good evening, everyone. And a warm welcome to you all to our Innovating in Midwifery event. Could I have the slides, please, Neil? Thank you. So the focus of this first presentation is Innovation in Midwifery, the journey so far. Next slide, please. I'll offer a very broad overview of innovation within the time available as a foundation for the presentations this evening. I'll discuss key definitions, consider innovation culture, moving to the development of an entrepreneurial mindset, and conclude with an overview of future activity. Next slide, please. So from this first definition, we can see that innovation is the application of creativity or a process of problem solving, which results in adopting new strategies, products, or services that meets a need in a new and different way. So innovations are about improvement in quality, cost effectiveness, or efficiency. So innovation often arises out of necessity in order to address a specific need or a gap in service, or the development or application of new technology. And of course, we've seen quite a lot of this during the pandemic with the changes in services within the NHS. Now, in this second definition, Kaya et al. 2016 define innovation in relation to process and consider innovation in the context of health. In this way, innovation is seen as having social benefit and will increase the health and well-being and care of individuals. So here, the issue of change being introduced by the process of innovation must be driven by need, whether this is necessity or by society. But it is important that innovation is not driven by financial or technological drivers alone, as new technology, for example, may not be affordable or sustainable across healthcare systems. And therefore, a new approach or a new product must be based on real need, is affordable, fits the context, is scalable, and does no harm. Next slide, please. So from a global perspective, World Health Organization emphasizes efficiency, effectiveness, quality, sustainability, and affordability of healthcare. And this is especially significant in the implementation of innovation in low and middle income countries. So the global significance of health innovation clearly illustrates that innovation is central to the improvement of maternity care, where the key drivers are safety, quality, and effectiveness. What innovation may look like is dependent on the context and the need, and does not necessarily have to be expensive to make a difference. So it's important to consider that innovation brings about change in systems and processes. And innovation is often considered as the engine of change. The culture is a primary determinant of innovation. And Cotter in 2003 states that only through leadership can one truly develop and nurture culture that is adaptive to change. So as midwives are seen as change agents, it's therefore useful to consider briefly the importance of innovation culture. Next slide, please. So it leads us to consider the key aspects relating to creating an innovation culture in practice. So this diagram illustrates the relationship between these four aspects: leadership, awareness, employee engagement, and innovation governance. And I'll spend just a few minutes on each of these. Next slide, please. So leadership is the key to creating the culture of an organization. And in this context, it's important to highlight the significance of transformational leadership, and more recently known as entrepreneurial leadership. So transformational leaders are deemed to have the qualities of charisma, inspirational vision, intellectual stimulation, emotional intelligence, and a willingness to offer individualized support and encouragement. Therefore, transformational leaders ensure clarity of purpose and message, a visible commitment to innovation through research and development initiatives, and by establishing a culture where different opinions and ideas are welcomed. So trust and openness are important to promote emotional safety in relationships across the workforce, which increases confidence in the sharing of ideas. So trust encourages individuals to discuss these ideas without fear of criticism, and that's extremely important. Awareness. So creating efficient communication increases the awareness of the overall vision and emphasizes kind of cultural transparency across the working environment. So a culture where everyone knows what's going on, being informed of latest updates, and sharing a shared vision across the workforce is key. Employee engagement. So creating a positive culture encourages an environment which increasingly increases positivity, empowerment, and ownership, in which individuals feel supported to constructively evaluate aspects of practice and to generate alternative ways of working. So this enables more collaborative innovation, presenting a more multidisciplinary perspective to identifying common issues in need of attention. And finally, innovation governance. So this highlights the need to recognize the importance of innovation and ideation. And ideation is the creative process of generating, developing, and communicating new ideas. And some organizations have established idea time, idea hubs, to facilitate the process of generating and sharing ideas. So having established the importance of the innovation culture, next slide, please. How can we facilitate midwives to innovate? How can midwives be supported to develop and express their creative ideas and contribute to and implement new ways of working? Next slide, please. So one such approach, which has underpinned our work in midwifery at LSBU, is the recognition and development of an entrepreneurial mindset. And this is defined here as a set of characteristics, behavior and skills that drive action, including having a future orientation and being able to recognize opportunities, think critically and creatively, problem solve, adapt and flex, communicate and collaborate, and take calculated risks. So 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with colleagues from Research, Innovation and Enterprise at LSBU on a pilot project in relation to enterprise education, in which we explored whether enterprise education was at all relevant to midwifery. Enterprise education is not considered a formal part really of healthcare education, especially midwifery. But I was introduced to the EntreCom framework, which is a common reference framework that identifies 15 competencies in 3 key areas. And you can see from this particular slide, the 3 key areas are illustrated in different colors. So these 3 areas are ideas and opportunities, resources, and interaction. And these really describe what it means to be entrepreneurial. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see the breakdown of competencies further. So within the ideas and opportunities, we have spotting ideas, we have creativity, we have vision, we have valuing others, and we have ethical and sustainable thinking. Within resources, we have self-awareness and self-efficacy, motivation and perseverance. We have mobilizing resources. We have financial and economic and health literacy, and mobilizing others. And into action, we've got taking the initiative, planning and management, coping with ambiguity, uncertainty and risk, and working with others, and learning through experiences. So having looked at this particular framework, we engaged in the activity of mapping these EntreCom competencies against the NMC 2019 Standards of Proficiency for Midwives. And this activity clearly illustrated the alignment between entrepreneurial skills and the professional role of the midwife. So this highlighted the relevance of enterprise education for midwives and reinforced for me personally the idea that midwives should have the opportunity through their midwifery education and the development of their professional role, the opportunity to explore, develop and establish an entrepreneurial mindset. So this reinforced really for me the appropriateness of embedding innovation and entrepreneurship across the curriculum with an emphasis on developing students' entrepreneurial mindset. Now, this forms the basis of a number of developments within midwifery at LSBU, which Amy and Sheila will discuss later. But for now, we'll focus on entrepreneurial mindset. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we see the skills, attitudes of an entrepreneurial mindset, which, as you can see, resonates quite clearly with the professional role of a midwife in terms of teamwork, leadership skills, resilience, emotional intelligence, confident, adaptability and flexibility, creative and innovative, self-belief, risk taker, self-awareness, and having an effective communication skills. Therefore, to summarize, we believe that embedding innovation and entrepreneurship across the midwifery curriculum is a proactive measure to support students to develop and embrace an entrepreneurial mindset, to address the issues of quality within midwifery care, and to generate ideas that make a difference. It is the foundation for development of midwives who grasp innovation and have the skills to push forward the quality agenda in midwifery. Next slide, please. So to summarize these two specific foundation points, really, an entrepreneurial mindset enhances the use of appropriate skills, knowledge, attributes, and behaviors necessary for transforming creative ideas into actions. Creating an innovation culture, though, within the maternity services is key to develop, enhance, and sustain the entrepreneurial activity of midwives to address quality, safety, and effectiveness of care. And last slide, please. So finally, and I've just remembered that I didn't actually introduce myself to you, whilst I may be familiar to most of you, but I'm Sarah Church, and I'm Head of Midwifery and Associate Professor at LSBU. And I'm very proud to be in this position to have completed this work, but also to really focus on the future activity, which will push forward really this work in relation to entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurship in midwifery. So we aim to focus on research in practice by looking at organizational culture, looking more broadly at this issue of process or issue of ideation and the process of ideation, and equally looking at the engagement between midwives in relation to innovation and change. From an educational perspective, we will be evaluating the student experience of enterprise education within our curriculum, but also thinking about exploring students' attitudes and the development of the entrepreneurial mindset as they progress through our programs. And finally, the whole kind of concept of teaching and exploring new approaches to support and evaluate enterprise education. I have some references and some future reading for you, but otherwise this is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Great scene setting there. And we were going to be hearing from you a little bit later as well. I'd now like to introduce our next selection of speakers, and we're going to meet some entrepreneurial midwives, and we're going to hear what and how are they innovating. So first up, I'd like to invite Elaine Sheehan to join us on screen. Elaine is a specialist midwife for maternal medicine and hypertension, and NIHR clinical doctorate research fellow and project midwife for digital development and implementation at Tommy's National Centre for Maternity Improvement, St George's Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. Elaine, over to you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you for this lovely opportunity to come and present here to you this evening. So I've been asked to talk to you about some of the innovations that we are doing at St George's Hospital, specifically developing a smartphone app for monitoring high blood pressure in pregnancy and establishing an antenatal hypertension clinic. So I'm going to go right back to the start in 2013 when I was working as a midwife at the Maternity Day Assessment Unit at St George's. And what we were finding was that women with high blood pressure were being sent into the day assessment unit with high blood pressure, and sometimes their appointments would take up to 2 hours. By the time you had completed a blood pressure profile, if it was high, you ordered PT bloods, wait for the bloods to come back, get them to see a doctor, etc. So we were thinking of how we could improve this. So we decided to implement home blood pressure monitoring. So Professor Asma Khalil and I submitted a funding application to what was then the South West London Academic Health and Social Care Systems. They're running a small grant scheme, which I believe is still ongoing, but they are better known under the name of the Health Innovation Network now. So we were successful in their bid, and we were given £5,000, and we bought a pool of validated blood pressure monitors and urine dipsticks. And what we did was we lent these blood pressure monitors to women, gave them a little log to log their blood pressures on, told them what their target blood pressure was and when to contact us if it was out of range or if they developed protein in their urine at home. And we would see them every 2 weeks rather than 2 to 3 times a week in the day assessment unit. And what we found was significant cost savings for both women and the NHS. Women saved on average, they had 4 less hospital appointments to attend. And the waiting times in our day assessment unit went from 1.76 hours down to 1 hour because women were coming with their blood pressure profiles, from the week. So you didn't have to sit there and wait for their blood pressure to come down. And most importantly, it was very positively received by the women. So you can see some of the results here in the centre. So I could go home to my husband and son and felt confident that I could manage my care and I'd know if something was wrong. I felt it was more convenient and it provided reassurance. It was much easier to monitor my blood pressure while I was still working instead of having to take time off work to attend hospital appointments. So based on the positive findings of this pilot project, we decided to scale up and introduce home blood pressure monitoring for all hypertensive women. And at the time, there was actually a pharmacist on the small grant scheme with me who was developing an app. So we thought, oh, maybe we could develop an app to enhance our home blood pressure monitoring care pathway. So that's what we did. We wrote another funding application to the Health Foundation, and we were successful and funded £75,000 to develop an app. So 3 app versions later, we now have the K2 Hampton app, which basically is the same concept. Women go home with the blood pressure machine, they monitor their blood pressure, but instead of writing it down, they enter it onto this web application. And if it's outside the normal range, they will get a trigger message onto their screen to say you need to contact your midwife or your maternity care provider. It will also ask them questions like, have you got a headache, visual disturbances, abdominal pain? And you can also put your protein urea results on the app. What's really nice about this is it's two-sided, so healthcare practitioners can also log in and see women's blood pressure readings in real time. So this helps to facilitate virtual appointments rather than just face-to-face. So we actually won a HSJ award for innovation in 2018, and shortly after this award, the project was adopted by the NHS Accelerator Programme, and K2 Hampton can be found in many maternity units nationally now. So what we did when we implemented it, we evaluated home blood pressure monitoring and the app versus the traditional care pathway with our control group. And what we found was women had significantly less appointments in the home blood pressure monitoring group without increasing adverse outcomes. So we were able to reduce hospital appointments overall, but we didn't see any increase in adverse outcomes for these women. We also did a cost minimization study, which found on average, we were able to save £286 per participant per week. So that's pretty significant cost savings for the NHS if you were to add all that up. And as part of my MSc, I did a qualitative study where I interviewed women on their experiences of using the smartphone app to identify signs of preeclampsia or worsening blood pressure. And what was really interesting about this was that it was much deeper than just the app for these women. So what was evident, what was really important for women was continuity of carer at the end of the app. So someone they knew, someone they trusted that could say, yes, these blood pressures are okay, or actually, I think we need to see you a little bit sooner than scheduled. As you can see here on the left-hand side, I've just handpicked some quotes from the interviews. So one participant said, what I found fantastic, which was really key to me, was the continuity of care with seeing the same two midwives in my case, excuse me, was excellent. And I felt like I was in good hands. If anything were to go wrong, at least there would be qualified people to help me. And that just made all the difference. Someone else said, I was so grateful for the hypertension clinic existing and having the option of home blood pressure monitoring. I mean, this isn't over the top, but I think it really made a huge difference to my whole experience of pregnancy and being pregnant. So that brings me on nicely to when we set up the hypertension clinic. So we set this up in 2016 alongside when we were setting up the K2 Hampton app. And we did it for the same reasons that we implemented home blood pressure monitoring. Women with high blood pressure, they live in our day assessment units. Anytime they go to a routine midwife or GP appointment and their blood pressure is high, they get sent in. So they have very long waiting times. And as you know, the last thing you want with high blood pressure is to be sitting in a busy waiting room, waiting for your blood pressure to come down. It has the opposite effect, right? So this was increasing patient frustration and dissatisfaction. So we implemented the hypertension clinic, which runs 1 day a week and has done since 2016. It's a very, very busy clinic now. We see about 20 patients per clinic. And we use home blood pressure monitoring and the K2 Hampton app. And it's led by 2 advanced midwife practitioners who can also prescribe. And this has led to increased patient satisfaction. So if this is something you were thinking of setting up, what's required is clinical space, so liaising with your operational management team, senior midwife and obstetric support. So I think this is really key for any idea that you may have. For me, particularly when I was setting up the blood pressure clinic, I was not an advanced midwife practitioner at the time. So it was really important to be able to learn from the senior consultant obstetrician, why are we ordering the investigations we're ordering? What are we looking for? Why do we prescribe different antihypertensives over other antihypertensive drugs, for example? Home blood pressure monitoring, of course, is optional, but I would highly recommend it. It's proved to be invaluable, especially since the COVID pandemic has hit and we can, do virtual appointments. I find it really useful if I prescribe an antihypertensive drug to look at the response to that drug 48 hours time. I can do that virtually without having to bring the woman back in face to face. We also created a clinical care pathway to go alongside the hypertension clinic, which I'll show you on the next slide. And clinical commitment to do something like this, I've said 0.25 whole-time equivalent minimum, That's what we do at St. George's, but I actually think you probably need a bit more than that, maybe 0.5. I find that a lot of our appointments or virtual reviews will spill into, our other maternal medicine clinics during the week. And I know that other hospitals certainly actually employ a full-time specialist hypertension clinic midwife. This is an example of our clinical care pathway. So what we do is we print this off and we put it into the women's notes, so women know when they should be seen and what to expect at each appointment. It's also quite a useful prompt for us as clinicians as well to ensure we've ordered the investigations or we've reviewed them. Does the woman need to start on aspirin? Is she aware of what her target blood pressure is? Have we reviewed their scans? Have we discussed timing of birth, etc.? So how is this different to the routine midwife care that these women would have been getting from their named midwives in the community? It's different because we are advanced clinical practitioners. So obviously we're still midwives, so we still provide that midwifery care. We still, talk to them about breastfeeding, discuss their birth plans, talk about their birth options. But we can, on top of that, also set their target blood pressure range, prescribe medications or discuss non-pharmacological interventions, interpret investigations such as echoes, renal scans, for example. Reviewing scans, I think, is very important if you're going to be looking after women with high blood pressure or women with high blood pressure or diabetes. That placenta acts very differently than those women who don't have these medical conditions. So it's really important to look at the growth, fetal Dopplers, uterine artery Dopplers, for example. And having your advanced clinical practice course, it really enables you to look after these women holistically and make these clinical decisions. Obviously, there's complex cases and we've got obstetric support in our hypertension clinic if needs be. And we also create birth plans for women who would like to birth outside of the delivery suite who've got a history of hypertension also. So the next steps for us is we're actually about to launch our postpartum hypertension clinic next month. And the reason we're doing that, on the left-hand side, you can see some pretty grim statistics for women who've had high blood pressure in pregnancy. So they're at much higher risk of developing high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes and stroke later on in life. Coronary heart disease is actually the leading killer of women worldwide. But most striking for me is this red bubble in the center, which reads 2 out of 3 women who've had cardiovascular disease in pregnancy will go on to die from cardiovascular disease in the future. And I find this really difficult to swallow when actually women can reduce the chance of cardiovascular disease by up to 92% through lifestyle changes alone, whether that be a change in diet, what they're eating, or exercising. So we believe this postpartum hypertension clinic will provide us with an opportunity to be able to discuss these risks and statistics with women in a sensitive manner. And we know that the postpartum period is the optimal time to influence change. So I think midwives have a key role in being able to educate women about this and about their future health. So yeah, in conclusion, if you're thinking of setting up something similar, just do it. Or there's many aspects of midwifery care that I think can be improved. I think starting with a pilot or a trial or presenting the plan to your head of midwifery is a good idea, or get a team together. Senior support from obstetricians and midwives always helps. And I'm very happy to be contacted for any further advice or support, or if anyone wants to come and visit the hypertension clinic, you're more than welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Great to hear from you, and we'll be hearing from you a little bit later when it's time for Q&A. Thank you so much. Next up, I'd like to invite Dr. Helen McIntyre, Associate Professor and NHS Clinical Entrepreneur at the University of Leicester, to join us. Hi there, Helen. You're just on mute there.
Yeah, fabulous.
Great.
Hello.
I'm going to share your presentation. Give me 2 seconds.
Thank you. So am I moving them on, or are you moving them on, Neil?
I'll be moving them on.
Okay, cokes. Thank you. Okay, so the innovation that I'm going to talk to you about is my Snoopy, which is Snuggle Me Baby, which is a skin-to-skin undergarment. So if we can just move on to the next slide, please. And thank you very much for inviting me to be with you today. So the plan for my presentation is that I'm just going to take you through a little bit of a potted history of myself and how we've designed the Snoopy, the research that's been undertaken on it, and then actually some of the sort of practical issues in terms of how do you get a product to market, really, and the sort of things that you have to consider. And some of those things are quite tricky, and it's actually combining all of those things together. So I qualified in 1991, so I've been around for a while now. And historically, we knew that skin to skin was good, but we didn't really have any mechanism to actually facilitate that for our women post-birth. So they were either having their babies on them with their pajama top over them, or we were using tubing grips, or we were using draw sheets, all manner of things, but none of them were bespoke for what we needed them to do. And all of them had a tendency to, you know, the mums were holding on for dear life, really, to make sure this baby was safe. So that's kind of like the background of where I'm coming from as a clinician who spent a lot of time with women trying to support them with feeding and with getting to know their babies and realizing that what we've got doesn't really work. And I then had an opportunity to move jobs. I went into the education sector, and obviously as part of that you become more and more embedded in that. And then I moved to a university, from a red brick university to a post-92 university. And then they had the opportunity of what we called a technical fashion department, and which then sort of opened up a whole new range of activities. So if you can just move me on a slide, please, Neil. So why is skin to skin so important? So we know that there are some physiological parameters that are going to be stabilized. So those are things like the temperature, heart rate, respiratory rate, carbohydrate metabolism. We know that the baby biome is much more likely to be developed in line with the parents. The cortisol levels in the babies are going to be reduced, and that's going to enhance the relationship building between the mum and the baby. One of the things that has become, I guess, more and more apparent as time has gone on is certainly within the UNICEF information. We talk very much about immediate post-birth skin to skin, and that's as in naked mother and baby skin to skin. But we actually don't talk about prolonged skin to skin. So that notion of actually extending it to 6 weeks, to 8 weeks, to 12 weeks. It seemed very much as an immediate post-birth sort of event, really, and maybe early postnatal period. But actually, maybe we should be considering it. And certainly some of the evidence from the women is that actually they use it as a mechanism to console their babies and actually to use it as something else in their toolkit that they can actually think about and consider using. So it is an undergarment that we've designed, and I deliberately use that word because they actually don't have to wear, or they shouldn't be wearing, a bra with it. So it's quite specifically worn underneath things. Okay, thank you. Do you want to move on, Neil? So the design process, as I say, I moved to Birmingham City University from Nottingham. And because they're a post-92, they actually have a fashion department. And as part of that fashion department, they had what they call a technical fashion department. And that means that they will create things or garments that are bespoke for a particular feature and fulfill a particular range of requirements. So I was able to go along and give them a brief as to what I was looking for in the garment. And 2 students decided they were going to create a garment for me, and Jade was the garment and produced the garment that I decided to use. And the reason why I decided to use it was because of the flexibility for the different shapes of women. And this becomes quite interesting when you get into it, and those of you that have maybe had bespoke ball gowns made for you will understand that actually things like your length of torso for the straps over your shoulders, the gap between your shoulders, not just your cup size, but where your breasts actually hang. All these sort of things make a big difference as to the type of garment that you have to produce. And what I really wanted was for this garment to be something that would be reasonably generalizable. So my image, my vision is that it's in the airing cupboard, and you basically in your store cupboard at work, and you basically go, okay, this lady's a medium, a small, and a large. We go and get a skin-to-skin undergarment, and we can then share, and it goes back in the laundry and then comes back through the system. And so hence some of the features that are on there. So as you can probably see on this diagram, you've got the two side panels that are ruched, and they're ruched so that, again, you've got this ability for breast tissue to enlarge and come back to shape. And also behind there are some like pouches for you to be able to put breast pads into. The middle panel is actually made of bamboo fabric, and that's been particularly used because of its breathability and also its ability to maintain that baby's temperature and not allow it to get any hotter. The strap that is underneath the ruching is actually is there so that you can actually place it underneath the baby's bottom when the baby is tummy to mummy, essentially, or chest to chest with its mum. And what that does is actually enable stability of the baby's bottom and keeps it in place. And then you can see there are straps that come from the mid back, and they come over the front, and then they will attach on the front of the bodice. And because of the way they're put together, they're flexible, so you can actually make them shorter or longer depending on that particular woman's torso. The little square box that's at the top of the diagram is actually to be used with the preterm garment if the baby is being ventilated. So it enables that baby to be ventilated and also to have the equipment stabilised. So the design was shortlisted for the West Midlands Innovation Award in 2015. As part of the design, we did generate a term version, a late preterm and early preterm, and then one for the father. And that's predominantly the late preterm and the early preterm is predominantly so that the covering, the central panel, is of the right size for a baby that is 1.5 kilos, 2.5 kilos, and then a 3.5 kilo baby. Obviously, as part of all this, there's an issue in relation to intellectual property. And as a university employee, although it's my thoughts, my creation, it still belongs officially to the university. So there's this sort of strange relationship that you have with it. There's also then the big debate as to whether you decide to go for a patent or not. And that's a bit of a chicken and egg, really. So as soon as it becomes patented, it actually then is in the public domain from the Patent Office. So people can say, okay, let's type in skin-to-skin garments and see what comes up. So by putting it into the Patent Office, it almost becomes a public domain. But on the other hand, if you don't do that, you're then really conscious all the time that somebody might decide to help themselves to your idea and the combination of ideas that you've put together. The other thing that you do have to think about is actually the name and how you're going to protect the name. And so there's a copyright issue that goes with that as well. Thank you, Neil. So we had the term garment first that was designed, and I managed to bid for a full-time GRTA, so Graduate Research Teaching Assistant, and she's now got her PhD, so that's Dr. Roisin Bailey, and you will find some papers that she's written out in the public domain. So as part of her work, she started out with an observational trial for me, so that we could really just see whether it was safe, just as a broad brush, because clearly this was a garment that had never ever been used for this purpose, with a group of very vulnerable individuals, really, as babies. And, you know, thereby hangs another very long and cautionary tale, really, in terms of midwifery, that actually, because we're dealing with babies, there's always the insurance challenges that go along with that. So anyway, we did the observational trial on 11 mothers and babies, and what was really fascinating was actually the way in which the mothers interacted with their babies. That wasn't something we were particularly expecting, but really did highlight that when mothers and babies are very close together, they do automatically interact with each other in a very positive way. And that was further reinforced when we went on to do the RCT. And so the women had the garments at home for 6 weeks, and Roisin would contact them to find out what they were doing, how they were doing it, how frequently they were using the Snoobie. And the main reason for that RCT was to ensure that we had good temperature regulation, because that was the key issue that many papers were concerned about if we were going to generate a garment that was going to be used. And I was very, very conscious that I wanted to create something that we could safely use in the NHS because it had had trials undertaken on it, and that they were going to be acceptable, really, by the women and by the clinicians. So the RCT has been completed, as I say, and some of it has been presented, but that's obviously Roisin's work. So I can't give you much of the findings from that, other than to say that the safety issues were corroborated. So I feel very comfortable for us to then move on to what's called the mainstreaming of the Snoobie. So this was actually how can we use this garment on a regular basis and recycle it, rather than it having to be a once only use. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. If we could just move on to the next slide, please, Neil. One of the challenges with a garment is obviously it has to be manufactured by somebody, and there's from an early point of view, when you're part of the original trialing process, it's quite a long process because of the NHS issues and the research that has to go around with it, and it's a much slower process than if you normally would take a garment to market, and most companies don't particularly appreciate that. So I'm now awaiting a licensing agreement so that we can actually take this garment to market and to large product sales, really. Next slide, please, Neil. So where am I at the moment? Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the mainstreaming trial was stalled, and we're just getting back on track with that. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to have some information with regard to the acceptability of women using a garment that has gone through the normal laundry process, which is really high temperature, in the same way that it would be a sheet or anything else. And like I say, the licensing agreement and the contracting side are quite a challenge when you're working between large organisations, because obviously I sit within a university. So the licensing agreement is actually between the university and a company. It's not directly with me. So there's quite a lot of legal work that occurs behind the scenes. Thank you, Neil. So that's where I'm at, really. It's been a long process. So started properly, I suppose, in 2014, and we're now 2021. But I don't think that's unusual when we're looking at products that come into the NHS or that are wishing to come into the NHS. And it's about making sure that the product, the research, the women's views of it, the safety aspects of it, all tie up together and they join up together. And that's the challenge that we have when we're working within the NHS. So hopefully you found that useful. It's not a complete end point yet, but we're getting there. Slow and steady, I think, is the motto. But thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was super interesting, and what a great name as well. I love that.
You have to say it with a Brummie accent, really. It's a Snoopy.
a Snoopy.
Snoopy, yeah.
Fantastic. I'll practice. Thank you so much. We'll see you shortly for questions.
Thank you.
We're now joined by Sophie Brooks, NHS clinical entrepreneur and midwife educator for UCLH NHS Foundation Trust. So Sophie, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the previous talks as well. Helen, that's one of my fellow clinical entrepreneurs. It's lovely to virtually see you. Bear with me, guys. I'm just going to share my screen, and I had problems earlier, so fingers crossed. Good. All right. So the aim of my presentation, so as a little bit of an introduction, so I'm a midwife. I'm a clinical educator at UCLH. I'm also an NHS clinical entrepreneur, which is a national programme for clinicians. I'm a member of the Digital Shared Decision-Making Council at NHSX, bit of a tongue twister there. And I'm also a co-founder. So I'm a co-founder of a company called Lister. I'm going to share with you more my journey as opposed to my company itself. Sorry, I jumped the gun there. So I won't go into too much detail of this because Dr. Sarah Church did a lovely introduction about what innovation is. She hit the nail on the head with all the kind of creative thinking about systems and processes that we're trying to improve. But why should midwives innovate? So this is something I feel really strongly about. I think midwives are very hardworking, smart, emotionally intelligent, busy, motivated individuals, and there's absolute plenty of space for us to be creative and innovate, particularly in the healthcare services. Maternity takes up a very large part of our healthcare, and midwives need to have a voice in what we're trying to improve, because nobody knows what needs to be improved more than the midwives who are actually working on the shop floor, essentially. We also, if you kind of stem on from that, is that midwives get the most about quantitative data. So if you think about all the discussions that we have with our women, when we spend 12 hours a day with them, we're getting all that feedback from them, from all the conversations, and nobody can take that away from us. I also really feel strongly about the importance of embedding the culture pre-registration. Something that I've reflected on through my journey as a midwife. My journey's really snowballed, and I kind of wish that it was spoken about a little bit before. I might have felt a bit more empowered, a little bit more confident to innovate, had we really embedded this culture from kind of day one, essentially. So this is a really, really simple pathway of my journey so far, essentially. I think my mindset, as I'm sure most of yours are, is quite clinical. So I kind of like that step-by-step approach. So yeah, this is where I'll talk a little bit about what my innovation actually is. So as like any business, I had an idea. And my idea stemmed essentially from working as a midwife. So the journey began when I was working on a postnatal ward. So for midwives, it's kind of very ward-based, my idea, and for nurses, again, it's that kind of when you're looking after numerous amounts of patients. And my idea came from my own frustrations. So what I found stressful was the whole management of looking after so many women. So when you've got, for example, 10 women and 10 babies, our minds have to remember their plans of care, what they need, their medications, the discharges, the admissions, their baby's obs, their obs, all of the above. And I used to get a little bit stressed, and I used to get anxious that I was going to forget to give women antibiotics or whatever it needs to be. And what I found was that I started to get a little bit of negative association with the postnatal ward. And I used to think, oh, this is my fault. I'm not a very good midwife, all these kind of negative thoughts coming into my head. And then I started to build a little bit of confidence, and I thought, actually, I am a good midwife and I work really hard. So perhaps it's not me. So this then stems on to the next pathway. And this is a question that's really embedded when we're talking about innovation, and something that gets spoken a lot about on the entrepreneur program. And is, what is the problem? So I did a little bit more digging, a little bit more groundwork on really trying to identify what was stressful working on the wards. And what I found was this. The tasks that we do, so by tasks, I mean all the previous things I just spoke about that the women need, on average per shift, so say you work 12 hours, you need to do about 120 tasks. So evidence-based, 10 tasks per hour. I then looked into research about what the human brain can actually remember, and it's about 5. So the problem is that the ratio between how much we have to remember and what we can actually remember is very vast. And we're starting to talk about this a little bit more in regards to human factors. So then this stemmed this pathway about digital innovation. And from this, I decided that rather than carry around pieces of paper, which is what a lot of midwives do to remind themselves of what is due, which you can question the efficiency of, I decided to create a digital list. I had the idea, I joined the Health Foundry, which we'll talk about. I've never met Will before, but I totally advocate the Health Foundry. And then it snowballed from there, actually. I got told to apply for the entrepreneur program. I interviewed, and then a team formed. So I met another fellow clinical entrepreneur who's a junior doctor who had the same idea. So where I'm at now is I have a company, I have employed people, and we've got a live pilot at Liverpool Royal, which is a juniors doctors list. And the plan is to start building this nursing and midwifery platform. So that's a really short snippet of what Lister does. Essentially, we just want to make a more efficient digital task management platform for nurses and midwives to manage their clinical tasks a bit more efficiently. We also want to look at how exciting that data might be. So if we're harnessing that clinical data, what can we use for it? We can gather information and insight into, for example, this midwife's done this many tasks today. Was that stressful for you? Tell me how this day was. And about empowering the midwife. A little bit further down the roadmap as well, we've got empowering the patients too. Potentially they can have their own app that tells them all their lists, all their tasks that's needed for them as well. So following on from that, I've put engage with champions. This is, if the world of entrepreneurial excites you, it's really, really vital to do this. And I've kind of been a little bit unsure on whose door to knock on and what do I say. I've got this idea, a little bit shy sometimes, but it's really key. And I think if I'm going to say one thing to you all, you will get no's before you get yeses, and that's okay. Get your champion, because if you feel really strongly about your idea, there will be people who will support you. And just getting that validation of, oh yeah, I've not thought about this, is really quite uplifting. So after all of that, you've got your business planning. And this is a whole new world. So we're used to the clinical scenarios, and then now you've got faced the whole language of business, which is a really exciting thing, but it's also a little bit daunting. I say a little bit, it's very daunting. So I'll carry on talking a little bit more about the business side as I go on. So what's important really is, you know, one thing to note is that this innovation could fail, but I don't mind. And I'll tell you why I don't mind. It's because I've learned a lot, and I'm proud of myself for giving it a good go. When I was a midwife, so when I qualified, you know, of course, we've got so much to learn about the clinical situation of being a midwife that I felt upon reflection that my career, my vision was quite streamlined. I only saw what I saw. I didn't understand about all the other arms that comes into the NHS. So I've learned a lot about the wider NHS and its organisations. This has led to me, as stated before, being part of NHSX on their Shared Decision-Making Council. Business planning, the language of business, all things finance, brand, marketing, team working, recruitment, product and project management, which is a really key skills that you get, which is unison with quality improvement tools when you're kind of wanting to bring on a new quality improvement project. Stakeholder engagement and analysis. Digital innovation, I certainly champion digital as I speak through my journey. Grant writing, NHS national aims and targets, and also a little bit about strategy. How are we going to get from A to B? And these skills are really important because they're not, you know, being a midwife isn't just the clinical situation that we get put in, because we've always got areas to improve on, and having these skills really puts us in a place to be able to, you know, be a part of that movement. Again, that's something that I feel really quite strongly about. The challenges, because it's certainly come with many, although I'm smiling. Time. I've actually put in a lot of my free time into the world of innovation and the entrepreneurial world. I don't necessarily think that's right. I think we should have time to innovate as clinicians. Not everybody wants to work over their already tired hours, and I totally hear that. Perhaps that's something that can be improved on in the future. Personal confidence, and I think this is part of the reason why I want to embed it pre-reg, because I felt a little bit shy. I'm like, oh, I'm a midwife, now I have a business. You know, perhaps that's not for everyone. Perhaps everyone's got a bit more confidence than me, but it certainly had to dampen my negative thoughts. Self-teaching, because I know this one's a little bit funny because I reflect on this. You have to learn a lot about business if you're going to have a business, and who's going to teach that to you? But you have to hold a little bit of credit, because when you're a midwife, obviously you get taught to be a midwife. Before that, with DEA levels, I tend to do healthcare. So who taught me strategy? Who taught me business planning? Which is why I'm really proud and really happy to be a part of this day, because it shows that we're trying to make a change, and shows that we're trying to educate, and that's a really great thing to have. I've put engagement. I don't intend on dropping down on one knee. It was the infographics that Microsoft gave me, so I went with it. But engagement comes, again, from trying to get your champions. I've already mentioned before, don't take the first no. You also need a financial engagement. You need to get somebody so on board that they will give you money. And I've recently managed to raise my first round of investment, which is exciting news. Who can help me? I've kept this short because I know I didn't have too long to talk. This is a big, again, I wish I knew from day one. I haven't put my email on there, but I would be more than happy to offer any mentoring or coaching to anybody who wants to innovate. But there's a few fellowships. There's a Florence Nightingale Fellowship. There's also some grants. So grants is free money, essentially. The Burdett Nursing Grant. Please have a look at their website, because I think they put yearly grants up. I've just applied for their recent one, which is digital innovation. The Health Foundry, I put that one on there. That's linked, I won't talk about this because I know they're going to talk about it, but it's linked to Guy's and St Thomas's, and then I met a nurse there and it just spiraled from there. And then of course the lovely NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme. If anybody is thinking of applying, please do. I don't know about this round, but I know the year that I got on accepted, same as Helen, which was last year, I think there was about 5 midwives and 700 clinical entrepreneurs, so we need more midwives. And that takes me to a close, actually. I hope you all enjoyed it. There's a few questions I haven't been caught enough on, sorry. But yeah, please do fire away.
Thank you so much, Sophie. We'll come back to you shortly when we've got time for questions. So thank you so much. Our next speaker, I'm very pleased to announce, is Professor Jacqueline Dunkley-Bent, OBE, Chief Midwifery Officer for England, NHS England and Improvement, and National Maternity Safety Champion and Visiting Professor of Midwifery at LSBU. Jackie, welcome, and I'll hand over to you. I'll share your slides just now. You're just on mute there.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here and just listening to such phenomenal speakers, such great innovators, very inspirational, and I'm sure that others feel the same way who are listening this evening. So my name is Jacqueline Dunkley-Bent, and I'm the Chief Midwifery Officer for the NHS in England. And whilst I haven't innovated, I have been invited just to share a little bit about the national perspective and my thoughts about innovation. So I wanted to seize the opportunity, but before I do, I just want to say a huge thank you for everything that, I hope you can see the slide, something has changed on my screen, but anyway, hope you can see the slide. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you for everything that you are doing and have done during the last 18 months or so. We have had such a challenging time for our NHS and our AEIs, and we have kept on moving forward, educating students and providing great care for mums and babies. So very quickly, on to the next slide. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about my ambitions as the Chief Midwifery Officer in England. And this is really to sharpen thoughts about where new practice may well arise, where innovation is needed and necessary to ensure that our NHS remains contemporary for people using it. So the strap line right at the very top, I want England to be the safest place in the world to be pregnant, birth and transition to parenthood, and a workforce that feels valued, respected and invested in. And a part of that, integral to that, is building capacity within midwifery leadership. So that is key. There's a whole leadership programme of work. And, you know, we need strong, innovative leaders who will be able to lead for excellence and ensure that we have the best for the very best. The second ambition is the perceptions. I want to improve the perceptions of the midwifery profession, both from within and from without. So there's something about public perception, and it has been challenging in recent times with some of the reviews that we're currently working through. The third ambition lends itself to the improvement, safest place in the world to be pregnant. And so improving quality and safety of maternity care is key. Now, to do all of that, we need something very, very special. And this is why I was really heartened to listen to some of the innovators that have gone before me today. So on to the next slide. Everything that we do in our NHS in England is very much influenced by this national ambition, an ambition set by our government. Many of you are familiar with this. So when you're thinking about undertaking a programme of work, a research, a study, a master's, a PhD, wherever you're however you're thinking about contributing to the body of knowledge, be that through the Clinical Entrepreneurs Programme, some of the ideas that we've heard today, just think about the foundational principles. We have a stillbirth rate that we need to do something about, a neonatal death rate, maternal death rate, brain injuries, and of course a preterm birth rate that we need to do something about. So all roads, when we're thinking about embarking on our academic research, entrepreneur, innovation careers, we need to think about our foundational principles, and we need to improve healthcare in these items shared here. And we have maybe until 2025, but I would say and beyond to do that. So on to the next slide. Many of you are familiar with Better Birth, the report of the National Maternity Review. That's now transitioned into the long-term plan. And I'm just going to share with you some of the new items in the long-term plan that we are implementing today. And I can't describe innovation, but I can describe new, and some of the things that may well influence your thinking when you're planning your next programme of work or planning your next steps in terms of what can I do in this space to add to the body of knowledge and move practice along. So next slide. So first of all, I'd like to share with you a little bit about the maternal mental health services, brand new. So these services outlined in the NHS long-term plan. If you haven't read the maternity chapter, I commend that chapter to you. I'm really proud of that chapter. And that chapter translates into commitment. So the commitment that we have on the table at the moment is doing something about mental health. I've got a caption that says, who can see this transcript? I'll carry on anyway. So the maternal mental health programme, it's targeted specialist care that will support women who need it most. So many women, I'm sure you're aware, have fallen through the gaps of the mental health care provision. They either don't meet the IAP services because they don't meet the threshold. They don't meet the threshold for psychiatric services. They haven't met the criteria for a community perinatal mental health service, but still require perinatal expertise. And an example of this may well be mothers that have lost their babies. They need specialist support provided by other psychological services, and I could go on and on. So it's really, really important that we launch, and we have launched, these perinatal mental health services. And what they will do, they'll deliver assessment of biopsychosocial needs, they'll involve consultation, advice, they'll direct care that's based on good evidence, psychological therapies, and so on. So these are what we're launching right now. So onto the next slide, you will see that we have within the perinatal mental health services, we have launched several early adopters, and they are the innovators. They are providing and presenting the vanguards for tomorrow. What will mental health services, perinatal mental health services, look like over the next 5-10 years? Well, these services, these perinatal mental health services, the vanguards, the early implementers, are doing just that. They're innovating for our NHS for tomorrow. And the great thing about the outreach services are that they allow partners to be a part of that provision as well. So partners that feel that they have got psychological trauma or some kind of emotional challenge, they can benefit from those clinics too. Moving on to the pelvic health clinics, this is another item in the NHS long-term plan, and this service is very much, obviously again, brand new, only launched in the last 4, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks or so. And again, early implementers, innovating for our NHS for the next 5, 10, 20 years. And why do we need to focus on perinatal pelvic health? For obvious reasons, like 1 in 3 women will have urinary incontinence post-birth, 1 in 10 will have fecal incontinence, and 1 in 12 pelvic organ prolapse within the first year of giving birth. So it's really, really important that we have these services. And so there are several early adopters across England. And as I say, they are testing out what our services should look like. They will be made up of physiotherapists, midwives with a special interest in pelvic health, and others. And so this is a really exciting time to, at these times when we have many continence products, we need to get upstream and look at how we can support women in their pelvic health, perineal health, pelvic floor challenges. And so we look forward to the blueprint that we're going to follow and roll out for everybody once our early adopters have finished implementing. Moving on to the next slide. So some of the pilot services, where are we implementing, and where are these vanguards taking place? Well, here they are on the screen for you to see. I don't need to read them through, but it's really exciting times that we have project management teams, midwives, obstetricians, physiotherapists, perinatal mental health services working in these areas to set up the blueprint for tomorrow. So really exciting times. And if you're thinking about an innovation that may well benefit either the perinatal mental health service or indeed the pelvic health service, then please do get in contact. On to the next slide. It would be remiss of me not to talk about contemporary practice and looking to the future in terms of what can we do. This isn't about an app that can. This is about more than that, the digital maternity picture. We have an ambition that by 2024, all women will be able to access their maternity notes and information through their smartphones or other devices. And many of you may well be thinking, why haven't we got that now when technology is so advanced? Well, we're getting there. We are getting there. So again, the benefits are demonstrable and you can see for yourselves there. And you know, there is something about saving time for the woman and her family and also for the health professional that's really key here. So if you have any thoughts and innovative thoughts, ideas, they don't even have to be innovative, about how we can progress this agenda along, then please do get in touch. I'm delighted that we've recruited a national lead for digital maternity. Julia Gudgeon is her name. She's a joint appointment between my team at NHS England Improvement and NHSX. So the first joint appointment of its kind. So delighted that Jules will be moving that agenda forward with Peter Mark Fortune, an intensivist that is working with NHSX. So any thoughts, please send them my way. On to the next slide. I won't go through in detail about the Clinical Entrepreneurs Programme because you've heard from some great entrepreneurs and their excellent work so far during this webinar. But there is something about you. For those of you that haven't engaged in the programme, then please do. On to the next slide and we'll see what the programme offers. You've heard from colleagues and there's nothing like the real experience bringing some of these things to life. But these are some of the things that the programme will offer and you will benefit and you will learn, and you've heard that from our colleagues so far. On to the next slide and my final slide. So this is a challenge to you. I've gone through a little bit about some of our new initiatives. We have a new initiative, another one that I haven't mentioned is the baby friendly. We want every trust in England to be at least on the first ladder of achieving their baby friendly status. So that's also in the long-term plan. And I think those that were pushing the boundaries 10, 20 years ago would be very proud now about the fact that we have baby friendly, wanting women to have breastfeeding as a food for their baby of choice, and not because of an alternative drive. So that's another initiative that we have on the table. Other things that have been happening during the last 18 months have been mind-blowing, and COVID, I think, whilst it's been absolutely dreadful for our NHS and obviously for people that have lost their lives, midwives and nurses, doctors, professions that are allied to medicine that have lost their lives, but those that are standing up in solidarity with others to help, to support our people using our NHS, they have innovated at pace. And I'm talking about oxygen saturation at home monitoring people who have got COVID, long COVID, rather than them being in hospital, monitoring them remotely using the oxygen saturation. We have the blood pressure machines that our women are using that we would never have thought of doing that maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And we have the attend anywhere, the virtual appointments. Now, all these things need evaluating. Of course they do, because they can't become a blueprint for the future until we learn of the unintended consequences as well as the benefits. So it's important that we do focus on what the evidence says about our new ways of working, before we roll out to others. And I'm sure that the clinical entrepreneurs that have shared a few minutes ago would concur with that. But this last slide, the last slide I leave you with, and this is about the equity and equality. We have a challenge at the moment where there is inequality that translates into some ethnic groups being 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy, where there is the inequality in health outcomes for a neonate, 66% increased risk of dying within the first 4 weeks of life if you are non-white in comparison to white counterparts. So we have a huge equity equality challenge, and I would urge everybody listening, if you are thinking about embarking on a programme of education that contributes to the body of knowledge, be that through a master's degree, but more specifically a PhD or a clinical doctorate, or indeed if you are thinking about engaging on the clinical entrepreneurs programme, think about innovating in some of the areas that I've mentioned earlier in my presentation, because we need your help right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie, so much. Would now like to hand over to Will Nicholson, Programme and Partnerships Lead, for our panel discussion.
Thanks, Neil. Firstly, just to say I've been absolutely blown away by all the presentations and just the sheer amount of innovation and energy I think that's already taking place in the system, and it's a delight for me to be here, you know, personally, as well as in my role at the Health Foundry, you know, as a dad of 3, and where the Health Foundry is based in Waterloo, right opposite St Thomas's Hospital, where I had my 3 children. You know, I'm forever going to be indebted to the midwives and to the support that my wife and I had, you know, with our children, you know, not just at birth, but I think someone mentioned, you know, into parenthood as well. And, you know, so it's a real personal privilege to be here. And so I just, before we get into the panel, I just really quickly wanted to summarize some thoughts, because there's a lot to process, I think, and innovation can be very daunting for a lot of people. And I'm going to ask some of the panelists to sort of comment on some of the questions that I'm imagining others might have. And if you do have any questions, please post them, and Neil will let me know if there's any specific questions that we can direct to either the panelists in general or to one or two. But that's really the role of the Health Foundry. It's a digital health community, as well as a co-working space. So we really want to bring together anyone and everyone that's kind of interested in improving health and well-being through innovation. And yes, we have a specific focus on digital and health tech, but a lot of the technology aspects or digital aspects have a really human element. So it's a lot broader than that. And I think that's my starting point, is that I've taken from all the talk so far that innovation is really broad. We've had an example of an innovation in terms of an app, technology. We've had innovation in terms of a product, what Helen was doing, you know, a garment. And we've had innovation, which Sophie was talking about, which is, yes, it was technology, but it's about service improvements, about operational efficiencies. And I talked with Sarah and Amy from the South Bank University about tonight's meeting, and we thought actually we were quite innovative, holding an event about innovation in midwifery. And then you hear from Jackie, and it's just fantastic to hear having your chief midwifery officer innovating at a policy level, innovating or creating that culture of innovation that Sarah referred to at the beginning. So you suddenly discover that innovation comes in all sorts of different forms. You don't need to just be an entrepreneur necessarily to be an innovator. You can innovate by giving permission to someone else to do to do the thing that they wanted to do. You can innovate by changing policy, finding resources for something else. So I think just wanted to open everyone's minds to, I guess, the term innovation and how you can apply innovation into all sorts of areas. And I think you'll probably discover that we're all actually quite innovative in our different ways, but that sometimes innovation is very focused on just the entrepreneur or the person that's created something brand new. Sometimes the best innovations are not recreating something or doing something new, but actually just realizing the strengths and assets of what we already have. I guess the second point I wanted to raise is that there is an awful lot to consider, and I imagine I felt quite daunted actually when you're hearing all the different, not just challenges that everyone experienced, but the sheer amount of work and effort that Elaine, Helen, Sophie, that the three of you put into your work. You know, the amount of time, all the different considerations that you're not just a midwife, you have to think about the business aspects of it, the intellectual property, how you create a licensing agreement, but you know, also the clinical aspects of things, and then how does it tie into policy? How does it tie into what Jackie's talked about in terms of the national needs, the big incentives or the big needs of the system? So there's an awful lot to consider. So you can think, wow, actually, I've got this great idea, but where do I begin? And that's my third point, which is you're not alone. And I think this event is already showing that. And there are so many people. I mean, to have Jackie say, drop her an email, you know, or get in touch if you've got an idea. And I'm sure everyone else on the panel and others here, including myself, you know, we're here to help. And I think that's a really important thing to know. And we have lots of examples in each of the presentations about different partnerships, different connections that everyone made. I can't remember who it was, but said, oh, I found someone else that had a similar idea to me. Or I connected, you know, I love what Helen was talking about at the university, combining a midwifery innovation or idea with the fashion department. And what Elaine did, connecting with a small grants program and finding other champions within St. George's, you know, to help her with taking forward her innovation. And so I guess, as daunting as it might feel, or as challenging as you might think, how on earth am I going to begin? How would I actually deal with all of these challenges? There's an awful lot of people out there. And so that culture of innovation, that sort of entrepreneurial mindset, I think what I really sort of strongly encourage, and this is what we love to do at the Health Foundry, and really open in terms of helping people turn sort of the talk into action, is that it's about connections, thinking about partnerships, and actually feeling part of a community of other people who are looking to innovate. And I was really struck by Sarah's initial presentation about the sort of culture of innovation, and she was talking about it, referring to it as in an organization. And what I find really nice about tonight is that that culture of innovation doesn't have to be confined to your team, your department, even your NHS trust that you're in. That culture of innovation is much wider than that. And that's what we love to think about at the Health Foundry, is that it's a kind of a whole culture of innovation. There's all sorts of different people who are passionate about innovation and midwifery. A lot more people than you probably imagine, you know, from the midwives and from everyone you heard about tonight, but also someone like myself, from some of the dads or the fathers of children. There's a huge amount of interest in innovation, and so don't feel like you're on your own on that journey. Okay, I think that's certainly enough from me, but those are just three things that I think take away. That innovation is very broad, although there's an awful lot of things that there is to consider. You're not alone. And I think there's an awful lot of opportunity and potential out there through connections, through partnership, and sort of being part of a community of innovators. Okay, so I'm just going to fire some general questions to the panel to get us going. I guess we've heard a lot today from each of you about ideas and some of those challenges. I mean, I guess what would be your top tip to someone from today in terms of who might have an idea and getting going on it? What would you suggest? Maybe start with Elaine.
I would certainly suggest getting senior input from your buy-in from the senior midwives and or obstetricians. It's very hard to do something alone. I think it's much better to work with the team to transform ideas and make it successful and be effective. Certainly for both the blood pressure app and setting up the hypertension clinic, I had senior midwife and obstetric input, and I think that was key to its success.
But aren't senior people very busy?
They are very busy, but you need them to drive it at meetings, to get it through the governance meetings. Obviously, you do a lot of the paperwork, definitely, and the hard work, and they're the people who get it signed off at directorate level.
And did you find that when you approached your senior, because it can be quite daunting to approach someone, especially maybe if you're new in post or you've only just got an idea, but did you find it quite daunting to go and approach someone about?
Yes, it is daunting, and I think Sophie touched on this earlier as well. You know, I was quite newly qualified back in 2013 as well, and I would say I was quite shy as well, and you don't know how to drive that forward, hence why you should get the buy-in from senior support. But it is difficult, and what's even more difficult is when you've got a new idea, it's really hard to change what's already happening at a trust. I'm sure others will agree. I don't think it's just down to the trust. It's hard to change people's opinions because it's like, oh, here's another thing that we have to learn how to do. Here's another training package. So I think it's important to try and sell how it's both of benefit to the women, but also for midwives, if you want it to be successful also. Great.
And Sophie, do you want to add your bit of advice, but also I think what you said earlier in your talk about not taking no for an answer.
I've definitely taken a lot of no's. Yeah, no, if I think for me, if having insight on yourself is key. So if I was going to do a SWOT analysis on myself, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? And the reason why I say that is because when you have business, when you have a startup, you have to know everything. So all the different branches of a startup. So you're your salesperson, you're your marketing person, you're your brand person, etc., etc. And there were some elements that I just wasn't very good at. So for example, finance. So I team formed with another fellow clinical entrepreneur who is a junior doctor actually, who had the same idea essentially, but for junior doctors. Again, they do the ward rounds and they write down all their tasks on pieces of paper. And I think what was really beneficial to work with Phil is that we both work to each other's weaknesses. So I think if you want me to put a short summary, is understanding what you're good at and what you're not so good at. And that's the reason that we team form. So going on from what Elaine says, I do echo getting senior input. I guess, yeah, having your champions. I think if I was going to whittle it down to one thing, I think it's mainly just about having the confidence to do it. I think, you know, there's a little bit of a little mindset change when you're going to knock on people's doors. I still get really shy doing it, but yet the outcome that I get when I talk to people has always been positive. So I think just not listening to your first kind of mental note that pops into your head, and just, stick to your guns, because I'm sure your ideas are great, and just, follow them through as much as possible. I guess that comes with resilience, doesn't it? But yeah, they're my top two.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sophie. Helen, what would you recommend to someone here tonight?
I think from both of them, really, just keep going with it. I mean, I guess there is also that a little bit that Sophie was saying earlier in terms of accept that you might have to change your innovation. So you might have a good idea, but it might not be quite right. And you have to be kind of not so proud that you're not prepared to change with it. And I know we talk about it in the entrepreneur program. You know, you're trying to solve a problem, and the way you've thought about solving it may not be the best way to solve it. There might be a better solution. So you need to be in love with the solution rather than in love with the product. If you can understand the distinction between that. And that's something that as you go on, it always gets tweaked a little bit. And I think I must be on about a 4th iteration for mine. So the basic framework is the same, but various bits have had to change. And some of that is about manufacture efficiency. So if you're going to upskill this to, you know, I don't know, 1,000+ garments, you actually need something that is much more streamlined in terms of the different versions of it. So that you then need, that then comes from talking to the manufacturers who say, well, you know what, if this was going to go to market, we would do it in this way or that way. So you're not changing the product, but you might be changing the ordering of it and the kind of the nuances of it, really, rather than essentially what it is. And I think the other big thing is just be in touch with people who are sort of bubbling along with you. And that's certainly something that you get from the clinical entrepreneur program, is that actually they're all buzzing with it. So there's an energy that comes from it, and they will question you, but you know that they're doing it for your benefit rather than trying to knock you down. And that's a really nice, and there's such a wealth of expertise within that team. It's just phenomenal, really. And yeah, you learn an awful lot very quickly, don't you, Sophie? It's very scary, but it is also exciting.
Yeah, I definitely get that from all the talks, actually, that embracing learning from this, and I suppose not being afraid to get it wrong, and to make mistakes, not being afraid to change and adapt. And
you have to be a bit of a risk taker, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think you have to be a calculated risk taker and be prepared to be outside of the norm. So all of us are pushing boundaries. You know, in the program that I teach on, I'm pushing a boundary. So there's always kickback. You know, there's always like, no, we can't do that. You know, why are you asking us to do that? Blah, blah, blah. And actually, you have to be firm enough to say it is really important for us to do this, but actually say, well, you know, let's see how we can make it work for you, but not lose sight of what your final goal is. Because it may be you've got to go from A to B to Z as opposed to A to Z. And it's those conversations. A lot of it is about communication. It's how you sell the product, how you sell yourself, how you engage other people to believe in that mindset, believe in that dream that you've got. But then I suppose the other thing with regard to the NHS is that we've got to prove that what we're trying to do, A, is going to save money, but B, is going to at least maintain outcomes, if not improve outcomes. And that's the difference, where if you're, you know, if I was producing a garment for the, you know, for the normal Joe public, I wouldn't need all this research evidence behind me. I could just go, oh yeah, let's go make a load of those, and it wouldn't really matter what they were like. But I can't do that. And the whole purpose of me doing it is so that as a midwife, I can stand up and say, I know that this product is going to be safe for you to use if you use it in the correct way. And that's the difference between manufacturing something for the NHS and creating something for Joe Public, really. I'll
Great.
shut up.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I just, what you said there earlier about not being wedded to the, I can't remember how you worded it. It was really nice. You know, not being wedded to, I suppose, the specific solution or the innovation, but having, you know, being very passionate about the reason why you're creating it in the first place. And that's, I think, really important to always remember, that who is it you're doing this for? What is the need you're trying to address? And that becomes the most important thing, rather than this specific idea that you've got. Just really quickly, I'm just really interested, while we've got Jackie and also Sarah available, because we talked a lot about the sort of a culture of innovation, and I guess both of them are in roles where they can help to facilitate that, either through bringing, you know, innovation into the whole midwifery sector, or earlier into training, into pre-registration that's been mentioned, but also into policy and how we create that culture of innovation. Have either of you, Helen, Elaine, Sophie, got any, you know, particular question or anything that you would like changed? What would be the top thing that you'd like changed, either from sort of the NHS perspective, or from some of the teaching and training that you get? Would anyone like to go first? Sophie, have you got an idea?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing is kind of go from, getting a senior input, but it's knocking on people's doors. So kind of similar to what Helen is saying, if you've got a product, you need your evidence-based. Is crucial. Unless you have your evidence-based, you're not really going to go too far from it. So you get your evidence-based from doing a pilot, essentially on a small scale. But getting that pilot is very, very challenging, particularly from, for example, I'm a midwife at UCLH, and we've got Epic now, which is a big EPR, and I'm all for electric patient records. So I'm all for them because they're necessary, and digital transformation is really important in hospital, but we still carry around paper notes. But yet Epic is a little bit of a barrier for me in innovating. Which there's pros and cons to do, but then essentially, if we're there supporting our own clinical entrepreneurs and our own nurses and midwives, we need to be able to support them whilst also implementing the big tech systems. So I think keeping that kind of open door to the little people that come knocking is probably one of the biggest things. And I think the way that we do that is by having such as discussions like these, and embedding it from kind of an educational perspective. The more we talk about it, I guess the more normal it would be, and the more doors will be open. So yeah, that would be my top pick.
Jackie or Sarah, do either of you want to respond to that? I know we're conscious of time with this, but if either of you wanted to reply.
Yeah, just a quick comment from me, really, just to say that I think as an educationalist, I think establishing that mindset is really important. And I think Sophie talked about confidence and maybe being shy, but it's actually establishing within the midwifery education program the essential aspects and characteristics, really, for developing the entrepreneurial mindset, and the embedding of the competencies is only one aspect of what we've done at LSBU, and you will be hearing about one or two other aspects shortly. But it is about growing, really, that innovation, that positivity and enthusiasm right from the beginning of the midwifery education program.
Thanks, Sarah. Jackie?
Well, I agree with what colleagues have said. I do think, though, that just going back to my presentation, there is something about focusing innovation so that it's aligned with the direction of travel for our NHS. It will be an easier journey, and more doors, big doors, will open. So this is why I just wanted to share a little bit about some of the things where the challenges, our ambition, where we're moving toward, and any thoughts and ideas about how that can be complemented would be really helpful. So focus would be my key tip.
And Helen,
well, I just want to say, I think from a pre-reg point of view and an early midwifery career point of view, it's about having a can-do attitude. We can do it, and we should be doing it, because as Sophie started saying, midwives view women and our relationships with women in a very different way to obstetricians or to anaesthetists or, to other people within the field of maternity services. And I think for a very, very long time, we've been subservient to a medical view of maternity research, maternity innovation. And what we're looking at, the other thing is it's women looking after women predominantly. And I think, again, we've got such a lived experience, most of us, that actually you understand, and you've got a connection with the women that you're looking after, and it makes sense. You kind of go, well, yeah, okay, I understand this. And I think because we're communicating so much with them, ideas bubble up. So, all those issues about pelvic floor and, women falling through the net in terms of perinatal mental health, any postnatal midwife who's working out in community will be completely familiar with all of those issues. So there's nothing new there. It's just actually bringing it full circle and doing something with it, rather than going, well, I don't do research, I don't do innovation, it's not my bag. Well, you know what? It's our responsibility as autonomous practitioners to be seriously thinking, how are we going to change the pathways for the women that we're looking after? And we've got a responsibility, as well as the strategic people, for actually going, well, you know, if we do this, this and this, it will make a difference, because the women are telling us it will make a difference. So it's feeding that information from the grassroots through the system to the top to come back down again, really. And this is only part of it.
Yeah, and it's all of those different levels, and it's all of the stages of career, and it's both the personal responsibility to do something about it as well as the system. So they're fantastic to hear that. Neil, I just wanted to ask if there's any questions from the audience, if you're able to.
Yeah, we do.
One of the panelists. I'm conscious of time, sorry, we were overrun. I was just really enjoying the conversation.
That's okay. I think it's fine to overrun, and we're fine. We've got a question from Naomi. A key problem right now is health inequalities at all areas of pregnancy. I'm a Black woman. I unfortunately had a preterm birth with my first pregnancy, and my child passed away this year. How can we encourage innovation in these key areas that are more difficult to tackle?
A great question. Does anyone want to come in first on that? I'm just looking at.
It was one of the areas that I had on my last slide, and it just aligns beautifully with the national ambition of equity, actually. Not any, well, inequality is important, but equity is even more important, and it links into the national ambition. So, you know, for those that have got sharp minds in terms of how we can tackle some of these issues and ensure that everybody is receiving the best care, not just based on postcode or how the midwife or obstetrician are feeling on that day. So I would encourage, you know, lateral thinking. What are the gaps? What do we know? What don't we know? We've got research from 1992 that's informing this journey. You know, I think about Mavis Kirkham's work on who listened to who in antenatal consultations. And here we are today with challenges of a real challenge in relation to preterm birth. You know, we have the Saving Babies Lives Care Bundle 2, element 5, that really links into preterm birth. So that will have a net effect. That is a universal offer for all women, but we need something bespoke for certain groups. Of it. The proportionate universalism concept, the Michael Marmot principle of proportionate universalism.
I guess
Elaine,
that's partly one of the reasons why my
Sorry, Helen. Elaine had a hand up, so I was just going to go to her.
Sorry. Thank you. Naomi, I'm very sorry to hear that, and I just wanted to say that I'm actually a project midwife for digital development and implementation at the Tommy's National Centre for Maternity Improvement. And I just wanted to give you some background to this centre, which was established about 2 years ago, and it's actually a collaboration between the Royal College of Midwives, Royal College of Obs and Gynae, and Tommy's Charity. And what we're doing is we are developing a digital app, which is actually about to launch next month, 2nd of August, which uses validated algorithms, and it's in line with the government's agenda to reduce the national preterm birth rates and stillbirth rates. So it's looking at, so currently the checklist that we are using at the moment is a standardized checklist. It's been around for 50 years, and it doesn't take into account how, you know, it doesn't de-escalate your risk. You may be a Black woman, but you might be very healthy. You might exercise a lot, and that should lower your risk. You shouldn't just be high risk because you're a Black woman, for example. So what these algorithms are going to do is look at the integration of these risks and decide what care pathway you should be on, whether that's an enhanced surveillance pathway where you'll have extra scans, or you might have aspirin to help for the blood flow through the placenta to reduce uterine growth restriction, which eventually should help to reduce the stillbirth rate. I hope that helps, and I hope you're going to see a lot more from the Tommy's National Centre for Maternity Improvement in the future. So we're starting with...
I was going to say, Elaine, is there any opportunity if people can get in touch with you to find out more? Or I know
yes,
Neil's
most definitely, yeah.
Yeah,
no problem.
Fantastic. So Helen, did you want to come in on?
No, I think all I was going to say really was, and I'm really sorry, but there's also that whole thing of actually creating something that is universally easy to use and acceptable. And that's really where the Snoobie was coming in. That actually is something that we know kangaroo mother care works, but again, we're not using it on a regular basis within the units. And there's a real culture shift that has to take place within those units, because it's very much at the moment the baby belongs to the clinicians, where actually the babies belong to the mothers. And if you're doing 24/7 kangaroo mother care, then actually they get to know what to do with their babies, and you're not introducing a whole load of other infections from the hospital. The baby biome will be the same as the parents' biomes, so when they go home they're much more confident. So I think sometimes we look to kind of really technical sort of solutions when some really essential, what I call essential midwifery care, would make a big difference, and that includes readmissions and all sorts of things. So that was all I was going to say. Great. Really.
Thanks, Helen. And what I'll just say in general in response to that where I don't have a specific answer, there's 3 networks I just wanted people to be aware of, where you might go and find people who would be allies in supporting you to tackle inequality, particularly around race and gender equality. So there's the One Health Tech network, which is about supporting women in digital health and digital leadership. There's also the Shuri network, who are doing amazing work supporting women from, I use the term because it's BAME background, but from to advance and progress in not just in digital health or health tech or in innovation, but in the NHS in general. And it's a fantastic network. And they're partnering with another organization called Hexatime, which is, again, an innovation that's come out of the NHS. It's a time banking platform for NHS professionals, where you can post any challenges that you have or anyone that you'd like to connect with, and you can see other people who can offer their time. And it ends up matching you with people who might be able to support you with your idea or any questions that you might have. So I think part of finding out the answers to these and tackling these solutions can come from finding others. And I think those 3 networks, hopefully Neil can find them, or I'll try and put the links into the chat. The One Health Tech network, Shuri network, and Hexatime could be really great places for anyone that has any questions. Neil, is there any other questions you want to post, or do we need to move on?
We do shortly. Oh, sorry. Elaine, there's a question for you if you're happy to type an answer to that one. But Ciliana asks, could non-medical professionals also apply to the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme? For example, could a designer apply for the programme, as people who are not clinicians, midwives in this case, they could also have a lot to offer and influence in terms of future innovations?
Very good question. Does anyone?
Yes.
I think the answer is probably no. Don't you think, Sophie?
I think you just have to. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll pop my email in the chat, and I'll clarify. I think they have to work. Don't have to be clinical. I do think they have to work in the NHS. But, I'll pop my email in the chat. I can't remember the name who said that, and I mean, this goes for everybody. I happily have any kind of one-to-one sessions or more advice.
Clinical and non-clinical. Just to mention that.
Yeah, clinical, non-clinical, sorry, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to clarify that answer for anybody or have further chats with people.
Great, thanks.
I was just going to say, Will, there's a question about the NHS motive and making money. which is an interesting one that I know we've had lots and lots of debates within the clinical entrepreneur program, and actually that it does feel a bit strange, there's no doubt about it, but actually you don't have to make money to keep the money. You can actually make the money to refund the next cycle of what you're trying to do. And actually what you find is that a lot of really I don't know, the really buzzy people in terms of innovation seem to use the money from one innovation to go into the next innovation, to go into the next innovation. So they like the thrill of creating and innovating, but actually then they don't want to stay with it. So they pass it on to somebody else and then they move on to the next innovation. So actually they're only using it as a sort, they're almost serial innovators. That's what I'm trying to get to. And I guess in terms of the amount of hours that you have to put into it and the risk that you might have to take. So some of the entrepreneurs have almost lost their houses. So actually whatever money you make at the end of it is way beyond, is nothing compared to the risks that you've taken along the way. And I'm not sure that actually most midwives on the shop floor are prepared to take those risks, or most doctors. So, you know, in a way you have to say, well, you know, good luck to them. You know, if they're prepared to take those massive risks, then, you know, give them the pleasure of the money that the bit of bonus that they get at the end of it. But for most of them, I would say their bonus is actually their sense of satisfaction with what they've achieved, not the amount of money that they're going to get. I mean, I don't know whether anybody else wants to comment on that, but there are different models of companies.
Yeah, I think it's just a general question for society and for everyone as a whole about how you apply yourself for purpose and what is it that you're trying to achieve. And I think going back to the aims and the needs of the people you're trying to support, how you know, I think the most successful organizations end up, or certainly ones that sustain, end up really connecting with the people that they're trying to support. And I think if you set yourself up, whatever you're innovating in a way that really is connected with that, I think sort of the finance aspects of it become less of an issue, but it's definitely a challenge for us to how you set out in such a way that you know, you retain that sort of authenticity to what you're trying to achieve.
And well, I think it's interesting also just to point out that midwives can innovate as employees within the NHS as entrepreneurs. So again, it in a way it removes that kind of business element of it, and certainly makes it more of a development and innovation for social benefit.
Definitely, great. Neil, I think we should we move on to the next bit of I'm conscious of the time there, Neil.
Yep, absolutely. I'll share the presentation.
Great, but thank you to all the panelists for answering all those questions, and for everyone that submitted a question as well. Thank you.
Amy, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thanks, Neil. Thanks for sharing this slide. And thanks, Will. Really interesting conversation. So I'm going to keep this brief because I'm conscious of time, but we just wanted to close this evening before we go into the open kind of networking and give you a little bit more of an insight into some of the things that have been going on in the curriculum here at LSBU. So I'm Amy. I'm one of the student enterprise managers here at LSBU, and our team, so myself and colleagues have been working with Sarah and her team probably for the last couple of years really to pilot various enterprise activity in the curriculum to look at ways how we can bring stuff in that wouldn't normally be there. Obviously, Sarah's talked about how the new curriculum and the standards have been mapped with the Entrepreneur framework and competencies. But there are a few other things I just want to give you an insight into. So one of the things we've been offering for the last 2 years to final year students is an elective placement in enterprise at LSBU. So we run this twice a year, so it allows us to offer it to the students that are converting from nursing to midwifery, but also students who are on the straight degree. And it's really an opportunity for students that are interested in the space, but maybe kind of don't know much about it. It gives them 4 days of a sort of deep dive, a really kind of compacted experience, giving them tools and resources to explore ideas. So we've talked about ideation, taking action. We use things like the business model canvas with them. We bring in speakers, so people like Sophie you've heard from, to inspire and really connect them with healthcare professionals that are innovating. And a lot of it, we've talked about confidence tonight, it's about that. It's trying to get them to be more confident in themselves and their enterprise skills. The next thing that we've been looking at, if you don't mind just clicking on, thanks Neil, is a certificate in enterprise. So as of this September, all midwifery students at LSBU will have the option to gain a certificate in enterprise through their programme. This is something that we offer as a team across the university, but we've been working with Sarah's team to tailor it, so it's a lot more flexible. So students can gain the certificate right across their degree. They take part in 6 workshops of their choice, all about building skills, all about reflection, and really kind of as a way that they can build some evidence as well for job applications. So we've talked also about reflecting on strengths and areas of development. This is where the enterprise certificate comes into that. I should have said with the placement as well, we've had 13 students take part in it so far, and we'll be building on that next year. So the certificate also will link to an opportunity for third-year students to take on an innovative project within their programme. So there's a link there. And then coming back to EntreComp, so all this mapping work's been undertaken, but we've also piloted this year some student workshops using the EntreComp framework. So the idea of this was to use the tool to help students better understand themselves. So I think Sophie mentioned this a bit. So this is looking at their enterprise skills in the context of their clinical practice. So where their strengths are, what they want to develop. And then we use the framework to help them look at job applications as well. So it's how they're going to be articulating these skills to employers. So that's just the flavour. I'm really kind of conscious of time, but I'm really happy to take questions in the networking event, and my contact details are up there. So if anyone wants to find out more about any of these, this activity and piloted work, then I'm really happy to share. I'm going to pass over to my colleague now, Sheila, who's going to talk to you a bit more about a particular innovation that she's been working on.
Hello, thank you so much for all the presentations this evening. They have been fantastic, and I do feel these are things so many midwives should attend, because it really inspires and energizes all of us, I think. So it's been great. So thank you very much for that. And this is sort of almost at the start of a midwifery career. So this innovation that we have produced at South Bank was really a simple idea. As Sophie said, innovations often come from simple ideas. You just know that you need to do something a little bit different. And I'm one of the lecturers, and I have been running the practice-based module in the final year for both the 20-month students and the 3-year students. This module is very linked to practice. Students have undertaken many modules throughout their training, and my aim was, or what I needed to work out, was how I could consolidate 3 years of training. How can we make students, or help students, to realise what they learned in their first year is just as relevant in their 3rd year, and just as relevant when they start their midwifery training. So how can we consolidate this learning? How can I also keep students engaged in their learning without it being repetitive, without going over things time and time again? So several years ago, a colleague and I devised a very simple board game with questions that covered theory and practice. We created a prototype. We tried it out in the classroom. Students loved it. We did an evaluation. They thought it was a great idea. And the sort of questions that we asked were related to theory, they were related to practice, they were related to obstetric emergencies, they were related to normality. So then this ran really as it was for a few years, and then I shared the idea. I shared it with Sarah, who's been speaking tonight, and we discussed how this could be moved forward to become more sophisticated and more professional, really. And she suggested that I worked with an intern and also with the Innovation and Enterprise department. And so I met with the team over there. We decided that they would advertise for an intern, and this they did. So I was involved in shortlisting and interviewing. And at the interview, a product design student had put herself forward, and she was engaged really for just several months. And this really supported me. This intern was undertaking product design, so we worked together, we discussed what we were going to do, and she worked out the graphics, that some of which you can see on the slide here. She worked on the graphics for the board, for the box, for the question cards, which I think you can see on there. And on one side, there's a graphic of possibly things like a CTG machine, a baby lying in the transverse lie, all sorts of things. So she worked on those graphics, and we created a prototype for a game. It was quite difficult working out how to actually get a board game made. You would have thought it was quite simple. There's lots of board games in this country, but it wasn't that easy. Claire did a bit of research, and she discovered that at the Royal Festival Hall, there's games testers, or there were before COVID, there were game testers every week that tried out innovative games. Now, we didn't ask them to look at our game, but we went there to find out where we could get cards published, where we could get boards created, where boxes could be created, who are the people that we need to go to, and to also give us tips about materials. So that's what we did from there. And we discovered that really we needed to go to China. So that's what we did. We got in contact with the company. We asked them the information they needed. We then eventually sent off an order to them, and the prototype came back. And this is really what you can see before you here. So we took that to the classroom. Again, we did this with 3-year students and with 20-month students who were all in their final year. You can see what happened there. We divided into teams, and the students basically played the game. And it was a case of moving the counters from one end of the board to the other, really from the antenatal clinic to a safe birth. If there were questions that nobody on that table, the students accepted or didn't accept an answer from their colleagues. So they were sort of peer assessing each other. One of the questions, you can see a pelvis on there, was related to the mechanism of labour. So we were bringing in early learning that they had done. And at the end, if there were any questions that nobody on the table could answer, that became a classroom activity so that we could complete the learning in that way. We evaluated the latest prototype, and are now at the stage where we can order final editions. Unfortunately, COVID, it also delayed our order from China in the first place, and of course we haven't been able to work through this and put in another order at this point. But hopefully now we can move forward and order some final board games. one of the good things about this is the questions are they're not static. Obviously they're static on that card, but as there's new developments, as there's new legislation, as there's new documents produced, we can create more cards so that we can keep the board game up to date. And at the same time, this is just designed for final year students, but we can use it for staff in the clinical area. We can also use it for first and second years. So there's room for further development. So in a sort of a nutshell, that's what the game is. Other lecturers were involved. They saw what we were doing. We had a big discussion about what to call the game. Certain labelling on the board was discussed as well, so that the whole team was involved to some extent. So that's it really. We just have a little bit more work to do. We're also thinking about making it digital, but again, you know, we need to begin at the beginning of that and seek funding and seek a business plan. So that's it. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, again, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you, Sheila. I think we'll go to the networking session for any questions, because I'm quite keen to move over there. I have included everyone's email addresses on screen, so you can see Sarah's, Sheila's, Will's and Amy's there. I will send that and a follow-up email along with the recording and the useful links that have been shared in the chat box by Will and many other people. Sarah and Will, would you like to make any closing remarks before we move over to our networking session?
Thank you, Neil. I just wanted to thank all the presenters for thought-provoking and stimulating evening of discussion. It's given me a number of different ideas, which I hope to contact people about. But I think what's been clearly illustrated really is that midwives can be successful entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs in relation to systems, processes and products. And it's also illustrated why, from a maternity services perspective, midwives have a role to innovate for excellence. So we have established, I think, an appetite for more discussion in relation to innovation. And I hope as an audience, and thank you very, very much for coming along this evening, I hope you can join us on this journey at another event. Thank you.
And the only thing I'll add to that is, yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch with us, we would love to be on that journey with you. Sarah at Health Foundry, we're all really passionate about turning this into action. So very, very happy to have follow-up events. We actually we're opening our space properly on Monday, 19th. So we can hopefully in future host events as well. And if anyone wants to take forward their innovations, we'd love to hear from you. Also, if we want to host similar events in the future, very, very happy to do it.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you shortly in networking.